What's up, everybody? This is George Yossi Samuels, and you are tuning into Bitcoin Will Come, which is a segment of the It Will Come show. And today I'm going to be going over why Bitcoin security is public. And so let's dive straight into it. Alrighty then. So, why Bitcoin security comes from being public. Short disclaimer, the following content is my own opinions and thoughts and does not constitute any formal financial advice. So please seek professional counsel if you are looking for such information. Remember, you are responsible for your own decisions based on any content shared here, but do hope that it inspires you to do your own research. All right, so today's episode is actually inspired by a video that I saw from Ryan X. Charles, who's the founder and creator of something called Money Button. And he started a series with Dr. Craig S. Wright called The Theory of Bitcoin, where he essentially just has a one-to-one chat with Craig, but sharing that with the wider world around all things Bitcoin, just to get a deeper understanding. And it's been quite insightful, to say the least. So I believe this is from episode 1, but we will dive into that a little bit later. So overview for today. We're going to be just revisiting Bitcoin itself for those who are new to the channel or this particular episode. We're going to look at the Theory of Bitcoin clip, so what I just showed you, but a specific segment that talks about Bitcoin security and why it's public. Then I will sort of outline sort of my takeaways from that as to why Bitcoin is public. Then looking at sort of secrets and lies and how that relates to why Bitcoin does need to be public, private blockchains, and then the future. All right, so revisiting Bitcoin again. So if you are new to this channel, then it's important to note that when I'm speaking of Bitcoin, know that in the market there is currently 3 versions of it out, even though they may have different names. But there are 3 main ones, which is BTC, BCH, and BSV. There's a lot of contention around it. Some may argue not really, but it's important that you understand some of these things, because some of you may be looking to invest, quote unquote invest, but really you need to understand what's happening underneath the hood, because we live in a world right now where a lot of people just don't know what to believe or who to believe, right? So it's always important to do your own research. So we have BTC, BCH, and BSV. When I refer to Bitcoin, at least in my show, in my episodes, I'm usually referring to BSV. But many of the things I talk about can be sort of relevant across the board, because they all sort of share the Bitcoin genesis. All right, Theory of Bitcoin. So I'm going to play this.
That you should be able to change it. So everything has to be put out there publicly. The block headers are all public. So that's the real secret here. It's not that we have more hash power or anything like that. It's that everyone has the block headers.
Security is that it's public.
Exactly.
And this comes right there.
And that allows many things to be built on top of it. So rather than awful password systems, we can start making tokenized security systems, where if we want to log into a computer, we could have keys that never leave our phone or something like this, that maybe has fingerprint recognition to access and sign a transmission that now gets exchanged, allowing us to log on to our computer. So imagine replacing passwords. Wouldn't that be good?
Definitely. Okay, so, but what I'm trying to get to here is, did you imagine that this is also in creating cash?
Okay, so I'll stop there, and we'll move into the next slide. All right, so why is Bitcoin public? So if you've seen episode 3, so that's just the episode before this one, I talk about explaining blockchain in terms of Microsoft Word versus Google Docs. And if you haven't seen that episode, I use the analogy of Bitcoin sort of being the natural evolution of money going from Microsoft Word days, where everybody had to just download work on their documents offline, and then share around multiple versions of the same files. And sometimes that would get lost, right? And versus when we moved towards a more sort of streamlined approach with Google Docs and having a single document where everybody could sort of edit together live, that's essentially all that's happening with Bitcoin as well. All right. So if you can imagine sort of the open public ledger of Bitcoin being like a single Word doc, whereby you can see everybody collaborating or transacting, right? So usually in a live single Word doc, you can see people typing away and maybe editing each other's stuff, possibly. And that could be the equivalent of all the transactions that you would see on a public blockchain like Bitcoin. And with that, every time any significant changes are made, that those changes are stored in a version history like this. All right, and these are on the right here. So these could essentially be your series of blocks in the blockchain. Okay, and once that takes place, you cannot delete them in a blockchain world. All right, so just sort of recapping that little segment from Craig. Why Bitcoin is public? One, it is secured by being open, so where it matters. All right, there's a bit of a yin-yang play in how Bitcoin operates, because some parts are open, some parts are private, and for good reason. So the parts that matter is open. It allows for greater visibility, right? So just like with Google Docs, you can see all the changes that are being made. It increases collaborative capacities. So this might be between potential miners or even people looking to build businesses on top of Bitcoin. It increases accountability, right? So because again, you can see all the changes. Auditability. So if anything bad or wrong or evil, happens, it could be traced back if needs be. Reduce costs. So by having it be open and public, you don't need to spend so much time trying to find all these different versions of, like we use the Microsoft Word analogy, all the different versions of a file, and then creating all of these systems and processes just to try and consolidate them all, which is essentially what's happening at the moment in many scenarios. And then just a natural evolution, right? So again, with money, we had a way that sort of everybody keeps their own money printing system. In a Bitcoin world, potentially, you could have all of it on a single system, but stuff built on top of it. All right, and it's just like how you had Microsoft Word moving into Google Docs. Protecting secrets and lies. All right, so this little Giphy here is from the TV series Revenge, if you haven't seen it before. And the reason why I showed that is because in the show you can actually see when you have secrets and lies, and then you try to keep those secrets and lies, it ends up taking up so much more time and resources, whereby as if you just sort of told the truth from the beginning, you could save yourself a whole lot of trouble, right? Now I can even admit that when I was younger, I used to be a prolific liar, but it took some things to happen to me in my own life to really humble me and teach me a lesson about the consequences of lying and then trying to cover up lies with lies, right? And so you see the same thing as well when you try to create anonymous systems, right? So this relates to sort of Bitcoin and blockchain in general. And when you also try to create these sort of walled gardens with private blockchains, what ends up happening is you create all these solutions to essentially, which costs more time and resources just to sort of cover things. And so, yeah, it pays literally to be more open with as much as you can, all right? But remembering that we are still human, okay? And so there are some situations where, secrets and lies might be the right thing to do. And if you're wondering what sort of situations those are, is if Anne Frank, the story of Anne Frank, the Jewish family that were keeping her protected during the Nazi era. Imagine if that family was honest and open about the whereabouts of Anne Frank or Jews in their household. That could have led to some very sad things, right? So there's always exceptions to rules, but on the whole, Bitcoin looks to promote a little bit more honesty when it comes to accountability on money from a foundational level. So private blockchains. So in the blockchain industry, there's a lot of talk about having private blockchains, but if you understand and take the time to look into how blockchains operate and why it makes little sense to have private blockchains, yeah, I mean, just have a look at this. So this was a post on LinkedIn that I saw, and it's kind of it's encouraging actually to hear and see people actually waking up to this. So Craig Wright, who I just shared before, he's actually been talking a lot in the past, way before it was popular, that blockchains, the idea of having sort of these private blockchains for corporations doesn't really make sense. And so blockchain, what? Listen seriously, I'm just going to read it. IBM does not have his blockchain. Oracle does not have his blockchain. IBM and Oracle sell Hyperledger. Hyperledger is open source. Hyperledger is a project of the Linux Foundation. Hyperledger is not a blockchain. Hyperledger is just a distributed ledger technology, so DLT. A DLT is not even close to a blockchain. Anything a DLT can do, any distributed database can do, as good, at a fraction of the cost, in a fraction of the time. So this kind of goes to the fact that, yeah, many blockchains often are worse solutions than just a normal distributed database. Real blockchains are only public. There are no such things as a private blockchain. It's nonsense like a private internet. Now, you could argue that you've got intranets, but it can still leverage the internet, right? A private highway system. It's not even a thing. It's a project that pretends to be a blockchain, mocking some data structure and nothing more. Now, stop pretending DLTs and blockchain are in the same category. They are not. If you think your project needs a private blockchain or DLT, save your time and money and use a regular database instead. If your project or company cannot use a real public blockchain, don't use a fake one and pretend that it works as well. I've got a 12-year-old experiment and 40 years of CS that supports my words proven wrong. So yeah, this is just something I've been talking about before, but of course people will still continue on with this whole private blockchain path. But in the end, if you're patient enough, you'll see people will start to see, all right, as they start working more with actual blockchains. So the future. So if we look at the internet, right, the internet, the idea for the internet had the idea of sort of digitally native money and payment systems on it in the very early days. But I don't think the technology or the bandwidth was really where it needed to be in order to facilitate that. However, now in 2020, the technology is there, and even 10 years ago, the technology was there to have something like Bitcoin work natively. But there's this concept called the metanet that's floating around in the Bitcoin world, and the metanet essentially is a Bitcoinized internet, right? So it's essentially helping to realize the true potential of the internet by having this digitally native financial component, right? And it's probably the best contender for it. There are many cryptocurrencies and blockchain projects out, but I think Bitcoin still, in terms of its original design, has the best solution, right? And the best chance of becoming that. So the evolution is from like an intranet to a metanet, and a metanet is essentially where all of these, all data is on the blockchain, and essentially everything can be a financial transaction. Now, not everything needs to be on a blockchain, but much of it, if needed, can have the data itself be a financial micropayment, right? So yeah, in the future, essentially we could look at, this is a visualization of the internet, and if you actually look at sort of how Bitcoin is created, it is also, it looks similar, because they're designed to be like these small world networks. And if you think about just our planet, right, Earth, it could also feel like a small world too if you've ever done some traveling around, and you bump into people who might know you. There is this phenomenon called the small world theory. So feel free to have a look or learn more about it via Google if you get the chance. All right, so what did you learn today? So, I spoke a little bit about the public aspect and why Bitcoin is public and how that actually is part of its security model. What are your thoughts? Would love to hear. Feel free to comment below, like and subscribe, and as always, remember, just trying to get here, through patience and persistence, it will come.